Hello, everyone. Welcome here to our next session. I am so incredibly excited that we have Chris Sell, the co-founder of Flywheel Software, and special guest Darrell Alfonso, who's Director of Marketing Operations and Strategy at Indeed, and as it happens, a Flywheel Software customer, and of course, my co-host, Frans. So we're talking about the shift of like marketers who used to aspire to the great corner office. Now it seems like the greatest opportunity for them is in the warehouse, as we've been talking about a fair amount this day here. This like shift we're seeing to a unified data layer with cloud data warehouses is really having tremendous effect. So I don't know, Chris, let's start with you. Like, what are you seeing the data cloud and unified data layer doing to the changes for how people approach marketing technology?
Yeah, and thank you for having us, Scott. Really appreciate it. But what the data cloud's starting to do is it's starting to shift the center of gravity overall in the MarTech stack a bit. So what we're seeing is, the MarTech tools are typically as powerful as the data they're fueled by. And so ideally you get all your customer data into a single marketing tool and you can use it across channels and you can create a great customer experience. In actuality, a lot of customers actually put that in their analytics stack in the data cloud, and that's where they're doing all of their measurement around the customer and what impact they're having on them. So as we're starting to see tools and MarTech tools shift to the data cloud, it starts to unlock all of the data that sits in the data cloud for a few key components, which the main ones are targeting. You can actually target your customer based on all the data. But then two, you can actually measure, instead of on opens and clicks, you can measure on the revenue data that's in the data cloud. So targeting and measurement are the big things it's blowing open in MarTech on the ground we're seeing today.
Well, we're like, so it feels like with this shift, it's like a set of trade-offs of, okay, like previously, we had a certain set of challenges with having, the data locked up in all of these different MarTech tools. Moving to a cloud data warehouse becomes a way to break out of those silos. I just love, like, what are some of the things like marketers need to be thinking about to make sure, like, for the challenges of like, oh, well, how do I take advantage of that cloud data warehouse in a really effective way?
Yeah, so I think that the key component is they're going to start working with their analytics team a bit more. So the folks doing the measurement are going to be the ones organizing the data for their use cases. And actually, Darrell, we've talked a little bit about this, of the strategy and approach of how they get this right working together is a key component, where a lot of times they'll think they need to get their data model perfect and they lead with technology versus saying, hey, what do I actually need to do in marketing? And Darrell, I know you had a few examples there where essentially you're seeing folks start with the end program or use case and work back to the data stack to make sure it's actually useful.
Yeah, totally. And if I could address too just the topic of like, I just think it's what like, instead of the corner office, we want to be in the warehouse. That's really funny. And I think that what it really is I think the savviest marketers are understanding that today you need to be close to the data and to your customers to make any sort of impact. And that's not, sitting several layers above. It's actually, right in typically a data warehouse. So I really think about the best marketers understanding first principles. You know what I mean? Like you have to engage customers, and you can only do that when you have the data about them, and you can also measure how you're performing and how those engagements are going. So I think that is the majority of the reason for the shift. As Chris is talking about, this is something that I have just tried to champion all the time is just being really strategy led. I think that there's too many teams, and oftentimes it's sometimes it's just lack of expertise, maybe like lack of high level vision, but they end up creating their roadmap from a list that they got somewhere. That could be like a list from maybe a vendor, maybe a list from an agency, and that becomes like their annual plan. Like, I want to implement features 1 through 5. Whereas we know that that's very backwards. You might get some of the way, but the real important way is to kind of understand like what you're trying to do, what kind of customer experience you want to bring about, and where those intersect with your business goals. And after you decide that, having the technology enable you to get there is where we want to be. So that's my take on that.
And
So,
actually, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, really intriguing. So basically with this software, you've been able to move the data, unlock it to your marketers, but then, and finally reverse engineer, go from use cases or customer journeys back into the data and find out what you want. Doesn't that come with a different skill set in your team, Darrell? And how do you do that? Do you have examples?
So, I think that what we have today, and Chris and his team have been really wonderful about this. I think at a high level, we're trying to, and we were just chatting about this. Some of the best technology is where you don't really notice it, and you don't really notice it's happening. It kind of like falls away. And what's left is a marketer doing the job that they were hired to do. And that is understanding customers, coming up with strategic messages and positions to move them, like influence them to get to the next stage and to be a happy customer. So if you like work backwards from that, an ideal technology setup is where a marketer has, almost free range, democratized access to the data that they need, without being encumbered by having to go to multiple places. Trust is a big part of that too. If a marketer does not trust that the data that they're seeing is correct, then that slows you down. There's a bunch of like verification that you have to do, like detective work that you have to do. That is not what they're hired to do. There's a saying that when it comes to sales enablement, the most important use of a salesperson's time is having quality conversations with a customer, right? Everything else is lower priority. Everything else really hinders that. And I think that there's something to be said around marketers. Like their most important use of their time is understanding customers and engaging with them at scale. So if you are doing things like having them be knee deep in data problems, you are doing them a disservice. So that's kind of, and you mentioned the skill set. That depends on your org. You know what I mean? We're fortunate to be an enterprise. We have data resources. We get to work with great partners. So some of that skills are technical partners that are helping us get there. If you're a smaller org, you might have to employ some sort of integration, low code, no code tools, things like that. But either way, it's not really about how you get there. I mean, that's important, but having that overall idea of marketer enablement and empowerment is, I think, should be like a North Star that you go toward.
And Darrell, just speaking to that kind of the MarTech falling away and the business user, one of the things that we've seen is at Indeed and other customers is, can you bring to the data cloud a way for marketers to interact with it to do their job? So if the marketer's job is to create a churn win-back program or a cross-sell program or an upsell program, how do they actually engage and do that? Can you allow them to leverage the data cloud and all the data they have on their customer in a self-serve way? And so with the Flywheel Audience Builder, the goal is to try to translate that so it's as easy as building a Google Ads audience for a marketer to do it, so they don't rely on the data team. And that's a key translation layer to get them operating together. And so Scott, you mentioned, how do you unlock the data cloud? You got to solve that friction right there. And a part of that is enabling marketers in a way that they actually want to find useful. And it's not some data tool that they need to rely on somebody with a specialized skill set.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So one thing I want to follow up, like Darrell, I think that was really insightful observation here, that in many ways, having all this stuff flow into a universal like cloud data warehouse, data layer, it sort of fades the MarTech tools a little bit further into the background and lets people think a little bit more about like, oh, what am I actually trying to do? What am I trying to understand with the customer? But that being said, like this stuff does also like flow back into, you know, these MarTech tools or flow from them as well too. So this is one of the reasons why there's been a lot of conversation lately about this idea of composability and how do you now, with this greater flexibility of a universal data layer, think about the way your stack is composed or interfaces to that. Any sort of perspective you could share on that?
Yeah, you know, it was a while ago. I had this conversation with a mutual friend, Scott, Pam Didner. You probably remember her.
Oh, yeah.
And I told her, you know what I wish? I wish that working with MarTech was as easy as like working with the Google Suite or like the Microsoft Office Suite, where, you know, these tools do different things, but you can actually copy and paste content and data right from one place to another. So like you can take a Google spreadsheet, copy it, and paste that right into a slide deck. And it has the same functionality. It's in the same format. That's what I mean when I mean like the technology falls away. Like, you know what I mean? And it enables you to do your jobs. And I think that that's the direction I'm happily seeing. And you know, with partners like Flywheel, things like that happening. You know what I mean? Where all of a sudden, we're thinking about Marketo or like some sort of email capabilities, but it's as easily transferable to like our in-product notifications or to some other channel, rather than, okay, take the data, export it, bring it over here, clean it up, put it in the right format. All of a sudden there's discrepancies. That again, like ties back to the theme of that's not the most important part of my job. That's that for marketers, that can be a waste of time. They're doing that 50% of the time. When I think about enablement and the technology that needs to get there, I think of, just cutting away, like if they're not spending 30% of their time on these data issues, what could they be doing for our customers? I think that's a game changer. And then if you think about that, you can also think about that in terms of time. When I was at AWS, there were like over 1,000 marketers doing these types of things. So if you save a marketer 2 hours, you multiply it by 1,000, and that's the business value that you rapidly create. So that's kind of how I think about it when we think about composability, when we think about transferring, like seamlessly moving between platforms. It's so wonderful and exciting to see us move in that direction, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think as a follow-up on that, like Chris, you and I have been talking, and I think actually you're in a position to, share a little bit of breaking news about some new capabilities from Flywheel on, orchestrating perhaps across these tools.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, just what Darrell, you were speaking to is you think about an email channel like Marketo, and then you think about how do you put that in a push notification and the friction that causes marketers and having to work through that process. They actually, if the data cloud centralizing the data and they could actually orchestrate across those channels in an interface that they found understandable, it would save them a ton of time. And so we find that marketers in a lot of cases think in terms of running cross-channel journeys. And if we can leverage the data cloud to do that, would be very powerful. And so we're actually launching what we're calling Flywheel Maestro. It's conducting and orchestrating these audiences from the data. If you're a Seinfeld fan, you'll definitely enjoy it. But you can orchestrate these audiences across channels, so marketers can say, here's who I want to target, but I want it to be consistent across push notification, text, paid media to email, and you shouldn't have to do any extra work to do that, right? So very excited about that, to be able to build out programs like churn, win back, cross-sell, upsell. So the marketers are thinking, like Darrell was talking about, your job is create a better customer experience and drive business impact. So, hey, I want to run a churn, win back journey that convinces people to come back, and I want to do it across channels. That's the level you want a marketer thinking at. Now the capability should be there, and that's MarTech's job.
Love it. Love it. Well, let's dive a little bit deeper here on like, okay, so the access to this just amazing pool of infinite data. Would love to get this a little bit more concrete. I don't know, maybe Darrell, you can even give us a bit of a sense, like, when your marketing teams have access, to that broader set of data, like, what are some of the things now they're able to do? They're like thinking about like, oh, this is data sources that can like help inform like the impact of campaigns, or deciding what like who we're targeting or how we're targeting them. Like, can you share anything with us about that?
Yeah, so I really think of it as like evolving into a more realistic and more close to reality type of marketing strategy, where you are engaging them and connecting with them based on what they actually do versus what we assume that they do, or we assume that they are. And that is, I think you're all familiar, but like historically, it's basic. Marketers try to base most of what they do on demographic and firmographic data, meaning like who they are, how much do they make, where did they live. But as we know, that doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? You could live in some sort of metropolitan city, but be super obsessed with farming, or vice versa. And we're making these just huge guesses. So the importance of the data warehouse and sort of like having this sort of single source of truth idea is that we're bringing together the information about our customers that they're actually exhibiting on our platforms. And it goes beyond SaaS too. Like with SaaS, it makes a lot of sense because you can actually see what they're doing, like what they're clicking, how much they're buying. In our case, like what type of features that they're using within the Indeed hiring platform. But you can include offline data too, like for retail or for other types of businesses where you need to mix the online and offline data. The important thing is information about what they actually do is better informs us of who they are and what they're likely to do in the future based on their own preferences. Netflix is like the perfect example of this. It is perfectly tailored to you because it knows what you watch. It's not guessing, So that's the movement to that. And what we do at Indeed, and I think what smart marketers do everywhere, is they really look hard at what customers are doing. We build models as to what they're likely to do based on what they've done before, and then leverage that into the activation systems. And then take that information, which again needs to live in the data warehouse, take that information and then improve that model going forward into this, as everybody knows, like this virtuous cycle that can really happen if you have the data in the right place.
So is that what you last year were talking about in London, your keynote? I remember many things, but two things stood out. One is create magical moments for your customer, and the other one is productize marketing. And I think that is just what you were talking about. Am I right?
Yeah, I love that. I love that we're all friends here. This is so great. So what I mentioned in a lot of my talks is that great marketing feels like magic, And what I mean by that is when you see an ad that speaks directly to you. You know what I mean? You're searching for a Mother's Day gift. All of a sudden you come across the ad. This is exactly what your mom wants. When you receive an email from Amazon that says the next book in your favorite series is now available, buy it now. It feels like magic. And it feels like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful I saw this marketing message. How often do we think like that? And the main takeaway is those magical moments are only possible if you have the data that you need accessible. Like there's tons that go into that. And it's why it's so important to have a coherent data strategy. The concept of productizing marketing, I think, is where you look at marketing through a lens of like, what are my users experiencing and what is the output that we're getting? So I think that those fall in like kind of in parallel with each other. They're slightly different concepts, But very much data, I think, is at the center of both of them.
What's interesting is when you start, Darrell, you have that transactional level data. Like if a customer stops spending, or what's the first product that they adopt, and you have a propensity model to predict the second product that they'll adopt. The question is, a lot of people are doing that work in their data science teams in the data warehouse and writing those predictions. So operationally, how do you build that into the magical customer experience that you knew that I was on product 1, product 3 is actually the one I'm most likely to adopt, and you know how to communicate to me in the right channel. And if you can bridge that from where the data science and data lives in the data warehouse through activation to the channel, like Marketo, let's take an example, that email goes out and they get this surprise and delight moment. It's the companies that tie that full stack together and can rinse and repeat and measure it fastest are the ones that are winning right now.
Well, speaking of magic moments, leveraging cool data, I think we have time for like one last topic, and boy, would be completely remiss not to bring this up, but so eager to get your perspective on the whole generative AI thing. You know, like, what are you seeing with it? And yeah, particularly, you know, Chris, like with some of the work that you're now doing, where do you see like the opportunity and the advantage for this? What should we be expecting generative AI to be able to do or not do?
I think, you know, obviously we got to live through the hype cycle, but I actually think a lot of the hype cycle is real for marketing. And I think Darrell and I were talking about the friction between a data organization who owns the data cloud and a marketing organization that's responsible for enabling magical customer experiences at each stage of the customer lifecycle. There's friction there because they speak in different languages. One speaks in schemas and data types, and the other one speaks in terms of customer experience and life cycle. How do you bridge that? And I actually see the role of generative AI is it's like a human to build empathy in the middle of those two roles. So, you know, we recently launched Marv, which is a way for marketers. One of the biggest friction points we see is marketers, they do marketing briefs and they say, I want to target people in Alabama that have spent over $100 and they like apparel. Go, data team, figure that out, whatever that was. Good luck, give me that back. And I want it to make sense and to be the right size of an audience. So with Marv, the goal was to say, well, a marketer should be able to speak in that way and say, hey, here's the strategy. Give me an audience draft. Use my schema that the data teams produced. And instead of that 20 times back and forth that takes multiple weeks, just show me an audience draft with a report and I'll tell you whether I think it's good or not and try again. And so you're solving that friction point between the language of a data schema and a way a marketer thinks for their program. So I think we're going to be iterating a ton on that friction point of how do you make generative AI communicate the data and who they're targeting to the rest of the marketing team and allow them to speak in the language they like, which is typically, you know, English, French, Spanish, not SQL. So.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add there, Darrell?
Yeah. I mean, I'm super excited about it, and excited about the work that Chris and his team's doing. I've you know, seen the early previews of the generative AI feature, and it's quite exciting. I think that like an interesting way to think about it is just these barriers to value, right? That I think is happening with generative AI. And where, you know, at a broad scape, there's a wealth of information online that is slowly being kind of blocked because of monetization efforts or things that may not be in the customer's best interest. And I think that that's where we're really kind of seeing, you know, OpenAI and ChatGPT really shining, where we're removing those barriers to the questions that we really want to ask. Both in terms of the actual information, but also the format that we see it in. And I think that can be applied to marketing technology, that can be applied to data, because some of the barriers could be, one, you know, not familiar with data, the language of data, and how to access it, and then two, not being familiar with these sort of like different taxonomies and organizational structures that the data is organized in, that you honestly shouldn't have to memorize. You know what I mean? So I'm very excited about the idea of one day just asking business questions to your MarTech and having them serve up, the data that you're looking for, and, possibly making some recommendations of what to do about it. So it's quite exciting. Very exciting.
It's amazing to me because the data cloud needed something like this to be that translation layer. Like, it begged for this solve, and it's very interesting that they're happening at the same time. Like, the data cloud is powerful for MarTech insofar as you can translate that data to be useful for these customer experiences for marketers. And you can do that with UI and UX in the easy builder, which is obviously what we focus on. The next phase of that is let them just ask the question. And then there comes generative AI with Palm and other models out there. So it's a great confluence that we think is just going to propel it even further and faster.
Wow. All right. Well, that is like the perfect thing to wrap this up with. A very compelling vision that is, not like something in the far future. It's starting to happen here today. It's incredible. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sponsoring the Best of Breed Marketing Summit. Darrell, thank you for joining us as well too here. Really love your other session here at the event. And thank you, everyone. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you so much for having us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.